there last evening at the Blue Jays game, and we had quite an experience. First time we've been out in an incredibly large crowd like that. Our son Brandon gave Pam tickets for the two of us, much a present for me as Pam, but for her birthday to attend the Blue Jays game against the Cleveland team last night. We sat in a section we've never sat in before, crazy good seats. But let me show you a couple of thoughts that we had while we were there. We're all here with our masks on, but look at all the people.
Second baseman number 10, Marcus Semien.
Sure, it's better than having 30,000 people here. Not much social distancing. Well, we're all wearing our masks, so we'll see. Yeah, so that was it. It's hard to hear probably really clearly as we were at the game last night, but it was hitting me how odd it was to think of being there with some 15,000 people, and we had to wear our masks. We had to wear masks. That's just still a public safety issue. It's kind of indoors. It's mostly outdoors. The roof is open on the Sky Dome. Rogers Center, I guess now. It's always Sky Dome to me. But to be around so many people, to be not socially distanced. Now, Pam and I ended up being in a row that was a little bit socially distant, but there were still people right in front of us and right behind us. They just weren't right beside us. And it was a little bit less people in that area. We just kind of looked around and said, what is the point of doing this with all these people here? And as I said on the video there, well, I guess 15,000 people packed together in this stadium is better than 30,000 people packed together in this stadium. And some folks will say, well, you know, it's just the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing. It's not a perfect thing, but it's a different thing. There's less people, less risk, I suppose. More people, more risk. There's always been, during this COVID crisis, aspects of what the public health have asked us to do that have often struck a lot of us as though that doesn't make any sense. And yet, what's being said and being encouraged and even mandated to be done is, well, this thing is better than that thing, even though this thing doesn't cover everything that could possibly be done. My friend Gwen Legacy back at our church in the Sioux, we used to have this saying between us in terms of, you know, we haven't solved everything yet, or we haven't done everything we could. And I would say, you know, remember, Gwen, do something rather than nothing, even if you can't do everything. Do something rather than nothing, even though something is not everything. Look, you can't do everything, but the solution is not to do nothing, but do something. And so part of the way we've seen ourselves slowly moving out of this 1.5-year-old crisis, it seems to be that even our vaccination numbers with those who are unsure or too stubborn or whatever your philosophy is, if those vaccination numbers at a percentage are at a certain level, then even those who are not vaccinated are going to have an advantage of that. And so we encourage folks to do that via the public health orders. But more to the point, you see things progressing. And there's one thing we've looked for in this last year, hasn't it? It's been progress. We want the numbers to come down even when they were in the thousands. We want the vaccination numbers to go up even when they were in the 2, 3, 5%. We want the number of deaths to go down, even if there are still people that are dying. We want the rate of infection from where it is to continue to drop, even if it hasn't dropped altogether. We're grateful here at Downsview Baptist Church that we've only had a couple of families, frankly one family publicly, that has spoken about contracting COVID, and so grateful the Hernandez family has, for the most part, come out of it, and Emil is still recovering. But there's progress, and we've all rejoiced in progress, and we should rejoice in progress even in our spiritual lives. You know, in Paul's letter to
the Ephesian church's pastor, Timothy, who is essentially who Timothy was. In the 4th chapter, when Paul writes to him in 1 Timothy 4, speaking about keeping the gospel central, it's something that isn't just central in his own life, but also in the life of those at his church. And so he says in verse 11, "Command and teach these things," centrality of the gospel. "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, love, faith, and purity. And until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation, and to teaching. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you." And here in verse 15, he speaks to our situation. "Practice these things, immerse yourself in them, so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching, and persist in this. For by so doing, you will save not only yourself, but your hearers." See, the Apostle Paul understands that the Christian life is a life of progress, and progress is seen in the processing forward, where we're moving in a certain direction. The reality is, when God brings you and I to himself, we are not the people that his son died for us to be, but it's the beginning of it. Sometimes you and I have struggles when we look at people's lives, and frankly, even our own lives, and we say, "I've surrendered my life to Christ. I am banking on what he has done on my behalf for my eternity of joy with him. I am crediting nothing of my own works or merit, but only what he has earned by perfectly keeping God's expectations in his life and transferring that to my account and transferring my sin onto his back, as it were, on the cross. And so I get his merit and he got my sin, having dealt with it perfectly, risen to new life and reigning now. And as our high priest, listening to our eager prayers, many of which are prayers for, "Let me be more like you." Isn't that your heartbeat? Isn't that what we want here at Downsview Baptist Church? That we'd be more like Christ than we were yesterday, today. There's an old love song that says, "I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow." And that's what we want to be with the Lord. I love you more today than yesterday. That's what I want to be true. But I don't love you as much today as I'm going to love you tomorrow. There's a progress in our Christian life, in our direction, in our movement. And Paul says that to Timothy. Listen, I want you to command and teach these things. Set an example for the brothers. Don't neglect the gift. I mean, these are things that are words of pressing forward. And in particular, verse 15, practice these things. Practice. We're watching the Olympics, many of us these days, and there's been years and years, I want to say hours and days and weeks and months and years of practice of the same routine again and again, and they have progressed. I was just watching this morning, about an hour ago, as Andre DeGrasse from here in our Toronto area just won the 200 meters. And he was progressing. All those years that Usain Bolt was the fastest man on earth, DeGrasse was getting closer and closer, and his progress was evident this morning at 5-9 as he won the Olympic gold medal. He says, practice these things. Involve ourselves in the regular reading of the Word, praying to the Lord, fellowshipping with Christians, serving one another, sharing our faith, reflecting the Lord Jesus. Practice that. Do it over and over again. Immerse yourself in them. That's an interesting word, baptizo. Immerse yourself, baptize yourself. That's what it means when we baptize someone, down into the water, that full picture of immersion. Immerse yourself into this. Give yourself completely to it, so that all may see your progress. Well, your progress is something that we want to be as partly a motivation. Do something rather than nothing, even if we haven't yet accomplished everything. We're progressing. We're doing some things that are right. And you know, brothers and sisters, some of you need to be encouraged in that. Some of you need to be encouraged in the midst of discouragement. There's besetting sins and discouraging aspects of life that you just can't seem to get over or leave behind, or even the level of being addicted. I can't leave it behind. I can't seem to go. And yet on one level you look around and you think, but you're doing better here. You're progressing there. You're moving forward in this other area. Be encouraged at those things, and let that progress be something that encourages and gives you hope for the other areas that you haven't yet overcome. And there's people on the other side who, well, I haven't overcome this, but at least I've done this, this, and this, and so at least I've done something. That self-satisfaction is a wonderful deception of the evil one in your life and mine, that our good becomes good enough, and good becomes the enemy of best, because we don't strive and we're not still seeking to progress forward. Can you imagine how things would be like that with this whole COVID crisis? Well, we got back together a few months ago. You know what? Good enough. We're just not going to try anymore. We're not going to try for any better vaccines. We're not going to try for other aspects of how this thing cannot be spread. We're just going to send the kids back to school, and whatever happens, happens. It doesn't matter anymore. We're not going to, no. That'd be just as foolish, and frankly, far more foolish when it comes to our Christian lives, to say, well, I'm progressing in some areas, so I'm not going to worry about the other ones. No, the progress. Let your progress be evident to all. Immerse yourself in these things. Practice these things. Devote yourself. Persist in these things. These are the verbs that the Apostle Paul uses in that area. And as you and I approach our Christian life, that's just the way we've got to be, pressing forward into that conformity to the image of Christ, knowing with no confidence in our own efforts, but with hopefulness that he who has begun that good work in us, he will bring it to completion. It's the hope of Christ that spurs us on to see ourselves progressing in holiness. Listen, if you'd like to join us tonight, we'll be here at the church at 7 o'clock. Got some chairs set up outside. I think it's going to be a lovely evening out. We'll sit outside and be able to meet, well, not in this place, but safely outside. And if not, come on our Facebook Live at 7 o'clock, and Lord willing, the technology will cooperate and you can tune in. And I'll try to keep my computer out there if the internet will work out that way, and see if you want to drop in a prayer request during the time that you're joining us. All right, see you tonight, friends.